The Okoro family was the epitome of success and admiration in the small Nigerian town of Umuoba. Every market woman, teacher, and local artisan seemed to know their name. Uche Okoro, a man whose presence alone commanded respect, was the town's most successful businessman. His electronics business thrived, attracting customers from surrounding villages and towns. Uche was always dressed in impeccably tailored suits, his wrist adorned with a gleaming gold watch. To the world, he was the embodiment of hard work and discipline. He often addressed community gatherings, speaking passionately about the value of ambition and integrity. His wife, Ifeoma, was equally celebrated. Known for her elegance and grace, she carried herself with an air of dignity that made her a role model for women in Umuoba. Ifeoma dedicated herself to philanthropy, leading charity drives to provide books for underprivileged children and organizing events for the local church. Her warm smile and calm demeanor made her seem unshakable, the perfect complement to her husband's assertive persona. Together, they were the kind of couple people whispered about with awe. Their 3 children completed the picture of perfection. Chika, the eldest, was the town's pride, a top student who had recently gained admission to one of Nigeria's most prestigious universities. He was the golden boy, always polite, always composed, and the child every parent wished they had. Amara, the middle child, was quieter and more reserved. With her nose always buried in a book, she was known for her intelligence and thoughtfulness. Her teachers often remarked that she had a wisdom beyond her years. Nkem, the youngest, was the family's bundle of joy. With his wide, curious eyes and infectious laugh, he brought light to every room he entered. The Okoros lived in a magnificent 2-story mansion set apart from the modest homes of their neighbors. Its white walls gleamed in the sunlight, surrounded by well-tended hibiscus flowers that added a splash of vibrant color. The house boasted a marble staircase, plush furniture imported from Europe, and a sprawling garden where Nkem often played. On Sundays, the family attended church in their best attire, sitting together in the front pew. Uche's deep baritone voice often led hymns, while Ifeoma's graceful movements made her a figure of admiration. Yet behind the perfectly polished exterior, the Okoro household was far from harmonious. Uche's dominance ruled the household. His words were law, and questioning them was unthinkable. Ifeoma, despite her outward strength, often found herself suppressing her emotions, smoothing over conflicts to maintain peace. The children had learned to tiptoe around their father's moods. Chika bore the pressure of being the perfect son, Amara retreated into her books, and Minkem was blissfully unaware of the tension simmering beneath the surface. The Okoros projected an image of unity and love, but beneath the fine silk of their lives lay a tapestry of secrets and unspoken fears that would soon begin to unravel. It was a gloomy, rainy afternoon when Amara's world shifted. The sound of rain tapping against the windows created a soothing rhythm as she searched her father's office for a stapler to complete her school project. Uche's office was a space few dared to enter without his permission. The room, lined with shelves of leather-bound books and decorated with awards and certificates, was a testament to his success. The polished mahogany desk stood at the center, its surface meticulously organized. Amara opened one drawer after another, careful not to disturb anything. She knew her father's temper and didn't want to provoke it. As she rummaged through pens, papers, and documents, her hand brushed against a small locked drawer. It piqued her curiosity. Her father had always been secretive about certain things, but this drawer was new to her. Why was it locked? What could he be hiding? Her heart raced as she scanned the desk for a key. After several minutes, she found a small key tucked beneath a pile of receipts. She hesitated, her conscience battling with her curiosity, but the pull was too strong. With trembling fingers, she inserted the key and turned it. The drawer slid open smoothly. Inside was a single envelope labeled private. Amara's hands shook as she reached for it. She told herself it was probably nothing, a collection of business documents or personal letters. But as she opened the envelope and pulled out the photographs, her breath caught in her throat. The images were unmistakable. There was her father, smiling and holding hands with a woman who was not her mother. In some photos, he had his arm around her waist. In others, they leaned close, their intimacy undeniable. The woman was young, much younger than her father, her face radiating a kind of carefree charm. Each picture was a dagger to Amara's heart, shattering the pedestal on which she had placed her father. Amara's mind raced. Could this be a misunderstanding? Perhaps these were old photos from before her parents' marriage. But as she sifted through the images, she saw timestamps that indicated they were recent, some taken only weeks ago. Panic surged through her as she stuffed the photos back into the envelope and locked the drawer. She quickly returned the key to its place and tried to calm her racing heart. What was she supposed to do? Should she confront her father? Tell her mother? The weight of the secret felt unbearable, yet the thought of exposing it terrified her. All evening, she avoided her father's gaze, her mind replaying the images over and over. At dinner, Uchi spoke animatedly about a new business venture, his voice brimming with confidence. Amara stared at her plate, her appetite gone. Ifeoma, seated at the other end of the table, seemed oblivious to her daughter's turmoil, focusing on making sure Inkem ate his vegetables. That night, as Amara lay in bed, tears streamed down her face. The man she had admired all her life, the man she believed was a pillar of integrity, was living a double life. The secret she now carried felt like a time bomb, ticking away in her chest. She debated telling her mother but feared the chaos it might unleash. What would happen to their family if the truth came out? That evening, Amara sat at the dinner table, her hands clenched in her lap. She couldn't bring herself to meet her father's eyes. The weight of the secret she now carried felt suffocating, and her throat tightened with every word that passed between her parents. Ifeoma, oblivious to her daughter's turmoil, was cheerfully discussing the upcoming church fundraiser. Her voice carried a lightness that felt almost cruel in its ignorance. Amara kept her gaze fixed on her plate, picking at her food. Uchi, sitting at the head of the table as always, seemed relaxed, even jovial. He was recounting a story about a recent deal he had closed, his deep baritone voice filling the room. To anyone else, it might have seemed like a normal family dinner. But Amara felt as though she were sitting in a theater, watching a performance where everyone was pretending to be someone they weren't. The illusion shattered when Uchi's phone buzzed loudly on the table. His cheerful demeanor shifted instantly. He glanced at the screen, his expression tightening for a brief moment before he rose from his seat. "Excuse me," he said, grabbing the phone and stepping out of the room. Ifeoma's laughter stopped mid-sentence. Amara glanced at her mother and noticed a flicker of something in her eyes, unease, maybe even suspicion. Ifeoma quickly masked it, returning to her meal, but the moment wasn't lost on Amara. Was her mother already aware of Uchi's duplicity? Or was this the first crack in the carefully curated facade of their perfect family? Later that night, as Amara lay in bed, her mind raced. The photographs, her father's behavior, the fleeting look in her mother's eyes, it all pointed to something far more insidious than she had imagined. Sleep felt impossible, so she got up to get some water. As she passed her parents' room, muffled voices stopped her in her tracks. "Why are you always so secretive, Uch?" Ifeoma's voice was low but filled with tension. "I told you it was a work call," Uch replied, his tone defensive. "It's always work, isn't it? Do you think I don't notice? The late nights, the sudden trips?" "Don't start this again, Ifeoma," Uchi interrupted sharply. "I work hard to give this family everything it has. Show some gratitude." Amara pressed her back against the wall, her heart pounding. Words like trust, lies, and forgiveness floated through the air, their weight heavy with implication. Was her mother finally confronting him? Did she already know about the affair, or was she just beginning to piece it together, as Amara had? When the argument subsided, Amara tiptoed back to her room, her mind racing. Her parents' marriage, once the bedrock of her world, suddenly seemed like a fragile house of cards, one gust away from collapse. A week later, another crack appeared in the Okoro family's polished veneer. It was well past midnight when Amara heard the front door creak open. She peered out of her bedroom and saw her brother, Chika, stumbling through the hallway. His usually impeccable shirt was wrinkled, his tie loosened, and the smell of alcohol clung to him like a cloud. "Chika?" she whispered, stepping into the hallway. "Are you okay?" Chika turned to her, his eyes bloodshot and rimmed with exhaustion. "I'm fine," he slurred, though the quiver in his voice betrayed him. Amara helped him to his room, her concern growing with every step. Chika, the golden boy who always seemed untouchable, was unraveling before her eyes. She sat him down on the edge of his bed and grabbed a glass of water from his nightstand. "Drink this," she said softly. "What happened?" Chica stared at the floor for a long moment before taking a sip of water. Then, to Amara's shock, he began to cry. "I failed, Amara," he said, his voice cracking. "I failed my exam." Amara's chest tightened. Chica's academic success was the cornerstone of their father's pride. Butching had boasted about his son's achievements to anyone who would listen, painting him as the perfect heir to the family's legacy. The pressure on Chica to succeed had always been immense. "Dad's going to kill me," Chica continued, his words slurring together, "and it's not just that. I got caught cheating." Amara froze. "Cheating? Chica, why would you do that?" "I couldn't handle it anymore," he said, burying his face in his hands. "The pressure, the expectations, everything. I couldn't." Amara placed a hand on his shoulder, unsure of what to say. Her once untouchable brother now seemed so small, so broken. "And what's the point anyway?" Chica muttered bitterly. "What's the point of being perfect when Dad isn't perfect either?" The words hit Amara like a punch to the gut. She pulled back slightly, her eyes narrowing. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Chica looked at her, his drunken haze lifting just enough for him to realize his mistake. "You know, don't you?" he asked, his voice laced with despair. "About Dad. About her." Amara's breath caught in her throat. Chica knew. He had known all along. The secret she had discovered wasn't hers alone. It was a festering wound that had bled through their entire family. She wanted to ask him more, to demand answers, but Chica shook his head and turned away. "I can't talk about it," he mumbled. "I just can't." As Chica drifted into a restless sleep, Amara sat on the edge of his bed, her mind reeling. The burden of her father's betrayal was no longer hers alone, but the weight of it felt heavier than ever. The facade of their perfect family was crumbling, and there was no way to stop it. The Okoro family was known for hosting lavish gatherings that showcased their wealth and unity. Friends, relatives, and business associates would gather in their home, enjoying delicious meals prepared by Ifeoma and served with her characteristic grace. But during one such gathering, the illusion of perfection began to crack. As Ifeoma moved through the dining area, balancing a tray of drinks and plates, her hands trembled slightly. She wore her usual warm smile, but Amara noticed the strain in her mother's eyes. The weight of appearances seemed heavier that evening, and Ifeoma's polished exterior appeared to be unraveling at the edges. It happened in an instant. One of the plates slipped from her grasp and crashed to the floor, shattering into jagged pieces. The room fell silent as everyone turned to look at her. Ifeoma's face turned crimson as she bent down to pick up the shards. "I'm so sorry," she murmured, her voice shaky. "Please continue with your meal." Guests offered polite reassurances, but Amara couldn't ignore the hollow look in her mother's eyes. Ifeoma excused herself and disappeared into the kitchen. Amara followed, finding her mother leaning against the counter, ripping the edge as though it were the only thing keeping her upright. "Mama," Amara said softly, placing a hand on her mother's arm. "Are you okay?" Ifeoma flinched at her daughter's touch but didn't answer. Her shoulders began to shake, and then, as though a dam had burst, she sank to the floor, tears streaming down her face. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Amara knelt beside her, her own eyes brimming with tears. "Mama, what's wrong? Please talk to me." Ifeoma looked at her daughter, her expression a mixture of pain and exhaustion. "I know about the affair, Amara," she confessed, her voice trembling. "I've known for years." Amara's heart sank. "Why didn't you say anything?" "What was I supposed to say?" Ifeoma replied, her voice rising with frustration. "That my husband, the man I built my life with, is a liar and a cheat. That I've spent years pretending everything is fine while he's out there humiliating me." Amara hugged her mother tightly, her own tears falling freely now. "Mama, you don't have to go through this alone," she whispered. Ifeoma shook her head. "But what am I supposed to do, Amara? Leave and let the world judge me, or stay and let him destroy what's left of us?" Amara had no answers. She had always seen her mother as unshakable, a pillar of strength in their family. But now, as she held Ifeoma in her arms, she realized just how much her mother had been silently enduring. That night, Amara couldn't sleep. Her mother's words replayed in her mind, each one a dagger to her heart. The cracks in their family were no longer invisible. They were gaping wounds, and Amara couldn't ignore them any longer. The Okoro household had been tense for weeks, with Uch spending more time away from home and Ifeoma withdrawing further into herself. Amara, Chika, and Teeny tiptoed around the growing chasm between their parents, unsure of how to navigate the storm brewing in their home. But nothing could have prepared them for what was about to unfold. One afternoon, Uch came home earlier than usual. His shirt was untucked, his tie loosened, and his usually confident demeanor replaced with nervous energy. He stood in the living room, fidgeting with his hands as the family slowly gathered around him. Ifeoma sat on the couch, her arms crossed, her gaze icy. Amara and Chika stood nearby, exchanging uneasy glances. Even Teeny, who usually brought light to the household, sat quietly, sensing the tension in the air. "I need to tell you something," Uch began, his voice uncharacteristically shaky. "There's no easy way to say this." The room fell silent, the air thick with anticipation. Uch took a deep breath and continued. "The woman, the one you've seen in those photos, it's not just an affair, she has a child. A boy, and he's mine." For a moment time seemed to stand still. Amara felt the blood drain from her face, her mind struggling to process her father's words. Chika's jaw tightened, his hands balling into fists. Ifeoma, however, was the first to react. She stood abruptly, her face a mask of fury. "You dare bring this filth into my home?" She screamed, her voice cracking with emotion. Before Uchi could respond, she slapped him across the face, the sound echoing through the room like a thunderclap. Uchi recoiled, but he didn't fight back. "I'm sorry," he said weakly. "I didn't mean for you to find out like this. But I couldn't keep it a secret any longer. The boy, he's 6 years old now. He deserves to know his father." "His father?" Ifeoma spat, her eyes blazing with anger. "What about your other children? What about the family you've destroyed with your lies and selfishness?" Uch hung his head, his shoulders slumping under the weight of his wife's words. "I know I've hurt you," he said quietly, "but I can't change the past. All I can do is try to make things right." "Make things right?" Ifeoma's voice rose again, shaking with rage. "How do you propose to do that, Uch? Bring your illegitimate child into this house? Asked us to play happy family while you continue to humiliate me?" Amara and Chika stood frozen, their world unraveling before their eyes. Tenny began to cry, her small frame shaking as she clung to Amara's side. Amara wrapped her arms around her sister, trying to shield her from the chaos, but it felt futile. The family's perfect facade had been shattered, and there was no going back. That night, as Amara lay in bed, she couldn't stop replaying the scene in her mind. The father she had once admired was a stranger to her now, and the family she had always believed in felt like a fragile illusion. She stared at the ceiling, tears streaming down her face, and wondered if they would ever find a way to heal. In the tightly knit town of Agbara, secrets didn't stay hidden for long. The revelation of Uch's infidelity and illegitimate child spread like wildfire, making the Okoro family the center of every hushed conversation and judgmental gaze. What once was admiration for their picture-perfect life quickly turned into pity, scorn, or outright derision. At church, Ifeoma could feel the weight of every stare. The whispered conversations were impossible to ignore. "Poor woman," one congregant murmured. "Imagine living with such disgrace." Another was less sympathetic. "She must have been neglecting him. No man strays without a reason." Ifeoma tried to keep her composure, but the judgment cut deep. These were the same people who had praised her poise and envied her life. Now they pitied her, or worse, blamed her for the betrayal. One Sunday, after enduring countless sidelong glances and thinly veiled remarks, Ifeoma stopped attending church altogether. She withdrew from every social circle she had once been at the center of, choosing instead to hide away in the house that now felt like a prison. Uch's once thriving electronics business wasn't spared either. Loyal clients began to distance themselves, citing personal reasons or simply vanishing without explanation. The scandal had tarnished his reputation, and even his most steadfast business associates hesitated to work with a man whose personal life had become public fodder. The whispers in the marketplace painted him as a man who couldn't control his household, a trait considered unforgivable in a patriarch. The children bore the brunt of the community's cruelty as well. At school, Chika was no longer the golden boy. Instead, he was mocked mercilessly by classmates who called his father a cheat and his family a disgrace. Amara, who had always tried to keep a low profile, found herself cornered by gossiping girls in the bathroom. "Your father must be proud," one of them sneered. "Two families, one man, impressive." The judgment didn't stop at words. Invitations to events dwindled, and even neighbors who had once been friendly now avoided the Okoros. The family, once held in high regard, was now isolated, left to fend for themselves against a community that thrived on their misery. For Ifeoma, the judgment was unbearable. The strong, elegant woman who had once commanded respect now rarely left the house. She spent her days in silence, staring out the window, the walls of her home closing in around her. She felt like a shell of her former self, trapped in a life that had spiraled out of control. Amara watched her mother's descent with a heavy heart. She wanted to help, but the weight of the community's judgment was suffocating her too. The family's once proud name was now a cautionary tale, and there seemed to be no escape. As the family struggled to cope with their shattered lives, the situation took an even darker turn. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, the doorbell rang. Amara opened the door and froze. Standing before her was Anita, the woman from the photos, with a young boy clutching her hand. The boy's resemblance to Uchi was undeniable. His sharp features and confident stance were a mirror of his father. Anita wasted no time. "I'm here to talk to Uch," she said, her tone icy yet self-assured. Amara's heart pounded as she called for her father. Moments later, Uchi appeared, his face draining of color at the sight of Anita and the boy. "Anita, what are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice low and tense. "I'd had enough of your silence," Anita snapped. "You think you can brush me aside and pretend I don't exist? Well, I'm done waiting. I need financial support for your son, and I need it now." Ifeoma appeared in the doorway, her expression a mixture of shock and fury. "You have the audacity to come here," she spat, her voice trembling with rage. "After everything you've done to this family." Anita didn't flinch. "And what exactly have I done?" she countered, her voice dripping with disdain. "If your husband hadn't come looking for me, we wouldn't be here. Blame him, not me." Ifeoma's composure cracked, and she stepped forward, her voice rising. "You're nothing but a parasite, feeding off my family's pain. You think you can just waltz in here and demand money? How dare you?" Anita smirked, unbothered by Ifeoma's anger. "And you're just a woman who couldn't keep her husband. Don't act like you're any better than me. At least I'm honest about what I want." The tension in the room was unbearable. Amara and Chika stood frozen, their eyes darting between their parents and Anita. Even Teeny, who had been playing upstairs, crept down to the staircase, her wide eyes filled with confusion and fear. Uchi finally stepped between the two women, his voice firm. "That's enough. Anita, you've made your point. We'll discuss this later, but you need to leave now." Anita crossed her arms, her gaze defiant. "Oh, I'm not going anywhere until you promise to take care of your responsibilities. And don't think I won't take legal action if you don't." Ifeoma let out a bitter laugh. "Legal action? Do whatever you want. But don't think for a second that you'll walk away from this without consequences." Uch grabbed Anita's arm and began escorting her toward the door. "We'll talk later," he muttered, his tone leaving no room for argument. As the door slammed shut behind Anita, the silence that followed was deafening. Uch turned to face his family, his shoulders slumped with exhaustion. Ifeoma glared at him, her anger simmering just below the surface. "You've destroyed us," she said, her voice cold and devoid of emotion. "Do you even realize what you've done?" Uch didn't respond. He simply walked away, leaving Ifeoma and the children standing in the wreckage of their once happy home. For the Okoro family, Anita's visit was a reminder that their nightmare was far from over. The scars of Uch's betrayal ran deep, and the road to healing seemed impossibly long. The weeks following Anita's shocking visit were suffocating for the Okoro family. The once lively household, filled with laughter and casual chatter, had turned into a cold, silent battlefield. Uchi retreated to the guest room, spending most of his time at work or locked inside his temporary quarters. His presence in the house was a ghostly reminder of the man who had once commanded respect and admiration, but now bore the weight of shame and guilt. Ifeoma moved through her days mechanically, a shadow of her former self. Once the pillar of grace and strength in the family, she now avoided eye contact with Uch, barely spoke a word during meals, and spent long hours pacing her bedroom at night. The betrayal, compounded by Anita's audacity, had sapped her energy. Yet she refused to show weakness, holding onto the fragments of her dignity even as her heart shattered. Chica's behavior spiraled further out of control. No longer the golden child, he skipped classes, stayed out late, and returned home inebriated more often than not. One evening, he stumbled into the house with a split lip and bruised knuckles. Ifeoma confronted him, her voice trembling with frustration. "Chica, what is happening to you? This isn't who you are." Chica lashed out, his voice raw with emotion. "Who I am? Is that supposed to mean something, Mama? Do you even know who any of us are anymore? Our family is a joke, and you're too busy pretending everything's fine to see it." His words stung, but Ifeoma couldn't bring herself to respond. She watched helplessly as Chica stormed off to his room, slamming the door behind him. She knew he was hurting, but she felt powerless to reach him through the thick fog of her own pain. Amara, the family's quiet observer, felt herself unraveling. Once the peacekeeper, she now found herself overwhelmed by the weight of the secrets, the arguments, and the growing resentment that filled their home. She spent hours in her room, staring blankly at her notebook, unable to find the words to process her feelings. The pressure to be the mature one was unbearable, and she longed for an escape from the emotional chaos that had taken over their lives. It was Teeny, the youngest and most innocent member of the family, who finally shattered the oppressive silence. One evening during dinner, as the family sat in their usual tense silence, she put down her fork and burst into tears. "Why can't we just be happy again?" she cried, her voice breaking. "Why is everyone so angry all the time? I hate it." Her outburst hit the family like a thunderclap. Ifeoma froze, her fork halfway through her mouth, while Ucha looked down at his plate, shame coloring his face. Chica and Amara exchanged uneasy glances, guilt written across their features. Teeny's words laid bare the truth they had all been avoiding. Their dysfunction was not just tearing them apart, but also hurting the one person who had done nothing to deserve it. Ifeoma reached across the table and pulled Teeny into her arms, whispering, "I'm so sorry, my baby. I'm so sorry." Her voice cracked as she spoke, the tears she had been holding back finally spilling over. The sight of her mother crying shook Amara to her core, and for the first time in weeks, she reached out, placing a hand on her mother's shoulder. That moment marked the beginning of a shift, however small. The family had reached rock bottom, and Teeny's heartbreak served as a wake-up call. They couldn't keep living like this. Not for themselves, and certainly not for the youngest among them. But the road ahead would not be easy, and none of them could yet see how to navigate the shattered pieces of their lives. Ifeoma woke up the next morning with a newfound resolve. She had spent too long trapped in a cycle of anger and despair, and Teeny's tears from the night before had made one thing painfully clear. The family couldn't heal unless someone took the first step. She decided it would be her. The first move was the most difficult. Sitting at the dining table with Uch later that day, Ifeoma handed him a set of papers. His eyes widened when he realized they were documents for a legal separation. "I'm done pretending," Uch, she said, her voice firm but calm. "This marriage isn't working, and I refuse to keep living in this misery. I'll stay under one condition: we all go to counseling together." Ucha looked at her, the weight of his mistakes etched across his face. "I don't want to lose you, Ifeoma," he said quietly. "If counseling is what it takes, then I'll do it. I'll do whatever it takes." The process was slow and fraught with tension. Their first family counseling session was awkward, with everyone avoiding eye contact and speaking in clipped sentences. But the counselor, a patient and empathetic woman named Dr. Chinier, encouraged them to open up. "Healing takes time," she said gently, "but the fact that you're all here is a start." As the weeks passed, the sessions began to bear fruit. Uchi admitted to his failings, confessing how the pressures of his business and societal expectations had led him to make selfish, destructive choices. "I thought I was in control," he said during one session, his voice heavy with regret. "But I was only tearing my family apart." Ifeoma, in turn, acknowledged her own role in the family's dysfunction. "I ignored my needs for years," she admitted. "I let myself become invisible in this marriage, thinking that sacrificing my happiness was the right thing to do. But it wasn't, not for me, not for my children." Chica, who had initially resisted attending counseling, eventually opened up about his anger and feelings of betrayal. I wanted to be perfect for you, he said, looking directly at Dooch. But how could I when you weren't even perfect yourself? Even Amara, who had always been quiet and reserved, found her voice in the sessions. I feel like I'm always the one holding everything together, she confessed. But I can't do it anymore. I need help too. Teeny, the heart of the family, became the symbol of their progress. Encouraged by the improvements she saw in her parents and siblings, she began to smile again, her laughter gradually returning to the household. Outside of counseling, each family member took steps to heal individually. Ifeoma launched a small catering business, channeling her energy into something that gave her a sense of purpose and independence. Hooch, true to his word, worked tirelessly to repair his relationship with his wife and children. He began spending more time at home, engaging with his kids in ways he never had before. Shika joined a mentorship program where he found guidance and support from older role models. His grades improved and he discovered a passion for architecture, inspired by his father's work in construction. Amara turned to writing, crafting short stories that allowed her to process her emotions and rediscover her sense of self. Her stories, often inspired by her family's struggles, gained recognition in her school and beyond. The Okoro family's journey was far from over, but they were no longer a family in ruins. They were a family rebuilding, one step at a time, with honesty, vulnerability, and determination guiding their path. For the first time in a long time, they could see a future worth fighting for.